I'm Bill Merrell, and today we're talking politics in Western Pennsylvania. The subject, of course, is on everybody's mind, the U.S. economy and how it's crushed the American families' budgets. All right? This is going to be a complicated program, and it's going to be a long program. It's in two parts, so just stick with me if you will. As you all know, gas prices over the last 2 years have gone up significantly. Then they started to drop. Okay? At the end of the Trump administration, gas prices were around $2.84. Okay? We'll talk about that at the very end of the program today, too. Prices have gone up over $500. That was the national average. This slide was downloaded almost a week ago, and it showed that the current time, at 9:26, the prices were at $3.71. Today on Good Morning America, they mentioned that the price overnight, based on the OPEC decision to reduce their oil consumption, is now back up to $3.89. Okay, so once again, that's an ever-flowing situation with gas prices going up and with our reduction of production here in the country. A few years ago, we were selling oil to other countries. Now, we're stealing from our supply. Gas prices, once again, this is from the New York Post on June 13th. This is all a plan that Biden had and his constituents in Congress had. Prices have gone out crazy, okay? On Jimmy Kimmel's program last week, now this was in June, okay, he was talking about blaming it on the drillers and the production process. Even Jimmy Kimmel, as you see the second paragraph there, says, "Mr. President, that doesn't pass the laugh test." It's sheer demography. Okay, Biden confessed his actual plan just 6 weeks ago when gas was already more than $4 a gallon. He marveled at the incredible transition of the U.S. economy away from fossil fuels. God willing, when it's over, we'll be less reliant on fossil fuels. Americans paid over $144 million per day under Biden for gasoline. Okay, and this is coming from Newsweek magazine, so it's not a political magazine per se. It is telling exactly what happened. As you see down there, American taxpayers paid $52 billion more out of their pockets for 1 year of gas, and you wondered where your money went. The current inflation, as we see it, and this was just downloaded the other day. This is updated September 13th, 2022. That it was around, and I believe it's an August rate of 8.25%. As you see, it has come from May of 220 down around the 1 and 2% range up to 8. Let's look at what has happened to the things in the marketplace. The used car prices soar over 30% since 2021. Okay, you see amid rising inflation, the people in the United States finding that buying a used car is not necessarily a sure way to cut costs. Private example of mine is that we leased a car for 3 years, and it just happened to be at the beginning of the year the lease was up. It was cheaper and better for us to buy the car and sell it in the market, and we gained about $5,000 in that sale price. So, like I said, the price of used cars have gone out of the universe at this point. As you see there, Connecticut leads used car prices with an increase of 35.2%, and Wyoming was least with 18.9%. 7 are coastal states that had the highest increase. The average list price for a used car in March was reportedly $27,246, down from a record $28,193, and that's for a used car. The average price of a new car has gone up substantially. This is from Kelley Blue Book, and you see that in fact the average price of a vehicle in March 22 was $45,927. That's still almost 13% higher than March 21. Edmunds reports the average new car price, in the first 3 months of 2022 was up $4,000 or over 10% during that same period of time. Now we get into the electric car, it's even worse. In August of 22, the average price for a new car of any powertrain was $48,301. At the same time, the average electric car price was $66,524, although the average electric vehicle sells for 37% more than the gas-powered vehicles since September, no, this is dated, I'm sorry, September 22. And before you jump into the idea of an electrical vehicle, let's look at the cost that they never tell you about, okay, which is really crazy. But the cost is also not just what you pay, it's how you have to plan. Okay, electric vehicle charging stations, and this is back in January, so I'm sure this number's gone up, but the percentage, almost 40% of these charging stations are in the state of California. You see over the right-hand side there are 4.17 million statute miles in the United States. Okay, and you wonder what that means. There's 3 level charging stations for EV vehicles. Level 1 is the kind you usually have in your house, if you're going to have one. Okay, charging speeds 3 to 5 miles per hour. So if you wanted to run from Venetia down to the crossroads and back again, you'd have to have your vehicle charging for about 2 hours just to make that short run. The level 2, which is also available in your house but mostly in the public places, would charge 12 to 80 miles per hour. Okay, and these once again are in the workplace or public. Level 3 is the high voltage, which in fact Tesla uses, and it charges anywhere from 3 to 20 miles per minute, and those aren't usually available in your house, so when you're planning you have to make those plans. Now the key to this is how much does that charging station cost you? Okay, here in the Pittsburgh area, especially in our area, you'd be looking at, according to the electricians that I talked to, about $4,000 to $6,000. This was in fact given to us by I forget the organization, NeoChart or something like that. But these prices range from very low to $800 to $4,000, but once again, the 3 electricians I talked to said it was over about $55,000 to $6,000. Where to charge up? Once again, going back to that 4,170,000 miles, and you divide that by, and this figure is once again the figure that they gave us, 118,600 known charging stations, then that means one charging station every 35 miles. And that's one charging station. So if you have multiple electric vehicles out, what does that mean? Who gets the first one? I guess the first one there gets it. Local charging stations, depending on type, and this really doesn't break down, but there are along Route 79, there are a couple. Down in Washington, there's a few. There's a couple in Bethel Park, Mount Lebanon, and apparently in our area somewhere. A little more about electric vehicles. Once again, level 1 charging. If you had a Tesla Model 3, which has a range of about 353 miles, it could take up to 4 days charging on a level 1 charging to get to those miles. Let's look at the cost of the batteries. If you are in the need for a battery, a good battery today is going to cost between $150 to $250. But I'd advise anybody who's looking, go to Pep Boys out in Bethel Park. Their prices are substantially lower. The cost of an electric battery, and this is not including installation. The cost of a battery between $3,000 and $50,000 per vehicle. And here's a little bit of an idea of what it costs. Tesla, $10,000 to $25,000 just for a new battery. Now most of these batteries are warranted for the length of either the car or 100,000 miles. So it's usually 36,000 miles to 100,000 miles depending upon the vehicle that you purchase. The one that really struck me was down here at the bottom, Hyundai. The price between $2,850 to $50,000 just for a replacement battery. I think that that's something that people really should be looking into. Now, it's not just the cost of the battery. All right, how much does it cost to replace that battery? All right, now that's going to be something very important too. The Hyundai Ioniq, for example, will cost about $28,500. The Kelley Blue Book wrote that replacing the battery in a Toyota Prius would cost about $2,700. Despite having brought the cheapest EV, Nissan Leaf, at about $27,000, if you need to replace the battery, it's going to cost $6,200 to replace the battery. It has nothing to do with the price of the battery itself. Okay, so when you're looking at an electric vehicle, you have to take all of these things into consideration. Tesla owners even have it worse. A Model 3 Tesla may cost just under $16,000. But that Model 3 only starts about $47,000. So owners have to depend on a decent amount of the car's value just to replace its battery. And that was given to us by Hybrids and Electrics, published on June 5th. Now to another depressing subject, the Dow Jones, from January 1st to September 30th. Okay, you see that at the bottom there. The Dow Jones dropped from almost 37,000 points down to just a little below 29,000. Okay, and for anybody who's in retirement with programs in the 401, you know how that feels. The stock market's fall wiped out between $3 to $6 trillion in retirement savings. And we'll talk about that here in a second. The people with the IRAs have lost trillions of dollars, and the people that I've talked to in my age bracket, in fact, know, like it says, that you probably felt like your savings fell off a cliff. With the median 401k account having a balance of just $17,700 before the pandemic, this year's market decline would lop off more than $3,500 in value. The would-be retiree with a balance of over $81,000, which would put them in the top 25% of savers, would see their nest egg shrink to about $64,800. And this is, like I said, you wonder why retirees are going back into the workplace. This is why. They have to, because their plans for long term aren't going to be working out well. What is inflation? Inflation is when the general price of goods and services increases over the economy, reducing the purchasing power of the currency and the value of the certain assets. The same paycheck covers less goods and services. It's sometimes referred to as hidden tax, and it leaves taxpayers less well off due to the higher costs and the bracket creep, which increases the government spending power. Here's a prime example. When I lived in Peters in '69, at Yanko Chevrolet, a Camaro only cost $31,775. That's it, $3,175. According to Edmunds, the new Camaro costs between $25,000 and $63,000. Now, this isn't a Yanko Chevrolet. This isn't a special by them. This is just their off the production line model. Okay, those cars were about $6,500 to $7,000 back then, which the Yanko Stinger, which everybody, if you ever watch Meekum or anything, you'll see that program, now those cars are bringing in $600,000 and $700,000 back. The overall inflation at the supermarkets between 2021 and 2022. Eggs, gone off the charts. Poultry, off the charts. Dairy products, seafood. We're going to be talking about some of these particular areas. Smart Balance butter, substitute. It's watered down. This came from shrinkflation, which is a new term. Came from the New York Post, but this has also been mentioned on rosin reports in the last couple of weeks. Same size, same weight, same everything. The one on the left was 64% vegetable oil. Now it's 39% vegetable oil, 40% reduction in vegetable oil. It was replaced with water. So what you're paying more for today is a watered down version of what 6 months ago you got more of. It also has omega-3. You can't see it on this slide, but it went from 4, let me see here. It dropped like 40% also. I can't make it out here too. One of the problems with getting old. Food inflation rises to its worst since 1979. Okay, the price of everything has gone up, and everybody knows that. Everybody has seen what the terrible rise in prices have taken its toll. I know whenever I go to Giant Eagle and I watch a family trying to pay for the 3 or 4 kids, and they're spending $400 a week in food. Thank God I'm retired military and we have a commissary because of the fact that their food prices are significantly less. But trying to see how a family today, I had 5 kids, and trying to see how a family today actually makes it on the budget that they have, based on the money that's available and the bills, everything. It's not like, oh, the food's rising and gas prices are down. It's everything is up. The minimum wage, how it hurts restaurants. Restaurants weren't, fast food especially, were not there for families with 3 and 4 kids. They were there for high school kids usually to get off, go into the marketplace, learn how to work at a job, learn how to show up on time, learn those things. The raising minimum wage means lower sales, smaller profits, fewer workers, and higher prices at the restaurant. If you've been to a restaurant recently, you know what this is about. But the profits of the restaurant owners will go down 77%. The sales will drop. If you go to a restaurant, you don't see as many people there used to be because they can't afford it. Food costs at a restaurant. Here's a hamburger deconstructed. The total cost is $1.86. The average restaurant price for that same hamburger is $9. They have to mark that up to, in fact, meet the rising cost. Here's a prime example of the rising cost. Fast food group KFC to lift prices a 3rd time in 2002, and this is from the Financial Review in June of 2022. Okay, so I mean, these are all the costs that these people have to go through now. Egg prices up 47% this year. How high will it go? There's a lot of things that are causing this problem. Once again, if it was just the problem that the eggs or the beef that we're going to talk about here in a second we're having, that'd be one thing. But this is not it. One of the rising costs here was the fact that they have less less chickens around, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. 2, the price of delivery, the price of gas for those trucks, the price of food for the chickens has all gone up. Once again, we have to look, and we'll do the same thing when it comes to these other prices. Ukraine supplied 40% of the world's grain. Of course, whenever they can't get the grain, the prices go up. Price of beef are poised for a surge that could last years. Okay, let's look at some of the reasons that are causing this surge. And it's not just the economy, even though that's playing a major part. The dry West Texas and other areas that raise cattle have had to kill a lot of their cattle because they can't afford to feed them. Because they, in fact, have to bring in food because it's not growing on the fields. So they have to bring in foods, and as they do that, the drought has caused them to slaughter their cattle. The meat is no longer available, and if you've been to the market, you'll know that, in fact, that's the case. We are facing a 40% increase in wholesale prices. Bread, $10 per loaf sticker shock, and this was done by the New York Post here in July. Bread prices are becoming another source of sticker shock for grocery shoppers during the period of decades high inflation. Consumer Price Index released for June showed the extent of the price surge for bakery aisles. Okay, once again, it's not unusual to go to even the Costco or Sam's Club and see cupcakes almost ranging $2 a piece. That was never the case. 3 years ago, you could get a dozen cupcakes at Costco for about $6. Okay. The Post also reported last week the American households are paying nearly $500 per month to cover their everyday expenses during the inflation. One of the benefits, if you want to call it that, is the Social Security could increase up to 9% in 2023. Whenever you're in the hole now, giving you 9% next year is not going to be that great of a thing to have happen. It's one of those things where you sit there and you go, well, it's good that that may in fact happen, but on the other hand, I'm still in debt from the last couple years. Sneaky inflation, toilet rolls get smaller as prices stay the same. Now, the sad part about this is these rolls are decreasing. The percentage is ridiculous. As you see there, the mega roll, which downsized from 300 to 366, double ply sheets from 396. Okay? And they also reduced the size of the sheets, which sounds funny, but they reduced it from 4.5 by 4 down to 4 by 3.7. So they reduced the size, they reduced the number, which causes you then to buy more every year than you used to. When we talk about shrinkflation, okay, back in November 21, General Mills family-sized cereal boxes suffered a 1.2 ounce loss, and now Cocoa Pebbles and Quaker Life have followed suit. In June, Dworsky, who was the Assistant Adjutant General of one of the states, we'll find out later, who was in part of the state's commercial enterprises when they look at prices and things. That was a box of Cocoa Puffs had about a bowl less, and Life dropped about 2.5 ounces. They won't tell you that. There's nowhere on that box unless you look at those prices that you'll see. Folgers Coffee. A devious bait and switch. The newest edition of Folgers Classic Roast Instant Coffee comes in a 9.6 ounce container, nearly 2 ounces lighter than last month, according to Reddit Post. Once again, none of these places are telling you that these prices are going down like this. Laundry detergent. Now this is an interesting one. Okay. Arm & Hammer detergent, which claims 67.5 ounces, can clean the same as 50 loads of laundry as the previous 75 ounces. Now, I'm not sure how that works. Maybe, as the writer says it, perhaps we were using too much detergent in the first place. But anyhow, once again, the prices stayed the same or went up. All right? They're not telling you this. They're not saying, they're not writing it on the packages. They're not saying anything specific about what is going on here with these prices. What they're saying is the fact that you have, if you want this product, you buy the product. It's at a, once again, you're getting less, which causes you over the year to buy more. Paper goods. Now this Charmin, this middle paragraph here is the interesting part. Charmin Mega toilet paper now has only 366, even though it listed 396 a year earlier. Angel Soft dropped from $4.25 to $3.20, while the prices stayed the same. Okay, these are all systems that, in fact, don't come out and tell the consumer that they've cheapened the goods. But they haven't cheapened the price. Matter of fact, they've inflated the price even higher because they're using the idea that everybody knows the gas prices for delivery and things have gone up, so they will accept these price increases. Now, when I was a kid, everybody brought the ice cream in 2-quart containers. Okay? A few years ago, they shrunk it to 1.75 quarts, and now the standard is 1.5 quarts. And they haven't reduced the price at all. Okay? And here's why I mentioned that you would find out. Downsizing is nothing but a sneaky price increase, says Dworsky, former Massachusetts Assistant Attorney General in the Consumer Protection Division. Okay, now he's the editor of Mouseprints, a consumer website. I'm waiting to open a carton of eggs and see only 11. The national debt and how did we get there? Okay, this all by itself is going to be a topic that will start up in the second section. And I'm hoping that everybody here is taking that cue that we're going to end the program here for part 1. We'll come back with part 2 after a break, and we'll move on from there. Coming back, we're talking about the economic conditions of the country, and one of the things that I failed to mention in part 1 is that I'm sorry to say, because of the culling based on bird flu, that 22 million chickens and turkeys have had to be killed. So you can expect Thanksgiving coming up to be at a higher price. Okay, and once again, I hate to bring bad news starting off part 2 of our program, but let's get to the program. The national debt and how we got there. Okay. Okay, you see that it in the last 10 years, we have gone up more than the 200 plus years since the country was born. All right, and this is because of the activities that have taken place, and we'll discuss some of those. The national debt right now stands over $31 trillion. Okay, now when you break it down, it gets really discouraging because it's the debt per citizen is $93,000, and the debt per taxpayer, that's somebody above the age of 18, is $246,000. That is what you owe the government based on our national debt for the services rendered. You see down below the U.S. debt to GDP, gross domestic product, in 60 was only half of the GDP. Now it's over 125%. So basically we borrowed more than we can possibly pay. Okay, and I realize that I mean, like, where is this program going? Well, we're going to hopefully take you to a place that shows how we got here. Increasing the national debt by president. Bill Clinton by 1.4 trillion, I'm sorry. George Bush by almost 6 trillion. Barack Obama by 8.6 trillion. Donald Trump by 6.7 trillion. Now I have to point out that Obama was in office for 8 years. So the programs that were there were talked about over 8 years versus these other presidents. And right now, you see at the bottom of Joe Biden's slide that it brought up $2.4 trillion in his first year. But this morning, I actually grabbed a new document that said budget analysis conclude Biden's policies will add $4.8 trillion to the national debt. So in the first year and a half, he has added almost $5 trillion to our national debt, whenever all the programs that he's talked about, in fact, are questionable at this time. How the national debt affects you. When the national debt is below the tipping point, government spending continues and contributes to a growing economy, which means more funding for programs that you can take advantage of. Okay? But when the debt exceeds the tipping point, your standard of living could be impacted, as it is now being impacted. Interest rates may increase, and that could slow the economy, and a recession may even be possible. Now, since Biden went into office, the term recession in the past has always meant two quarters of economic growth which has slowed or have gone down into the negative. We have had that, but they have continued to push a different wording, and I want to say that they changed the vocabulary when it comes to recession. Today they're looking at a jobs report that will solidify in somebody's mind, and like I said, I'm not sure who it is, that if we're going into a recession or not. This also puts a downward pressure on the country's currency value. It's tied to the value of the country's bonds. The currency value declines, the foreign bondholders' repayments are worth less, that further decreases demand and drives up interest rates, which we see that happening today. Financial moves by our presidents and how it affects our debt. In '71, Nixon went off the gold standard. What does that mean? Well, up until that point, our dollars were supported by gold. So everything we had in Fort Knox were in fact based on our dollars. So if you had a dollar and went to the federal government, you could get a dollar's worth of gold for trading in that dollar. Well, in '71, Nixon went off the gold standard. So what this meant was basically the government didn't have any control over how much money was being spent. It was based on the good faith of our government, which is questionable at times. All right? The Federal Reserve continues to demand more power despite it being complete and utter failure in every regard. The Fed, as we know it today, has been raising interest rates, which is slowing the economy, which is raising house costs, which is raising mortgage costs, which is raising, and we'll discuss a lot of those things coming up. How did Reagan's policies affect it? Well, it wasn't too bad, all right? There was a steep recession in '82, and between the economic boom lasted for 92 months without a recession from '82 to July of 1990, the longest period of sustained growth during peacetime and the second longest period of sustained growth in the U.S. history. The verdict of Trump's economic stewardship before and COVID and after. Once again, before things started to go up a little bit, unemployment rate fell from 4.7 down to near where it's supposedly today at 3.5, but then COVID hit. And then the jobless rate went up significantly to 14.7 when people were kept out of their offices or were told to, in fact, work from home. A lot of the jobs in industry, in fact, were cut because they couldn't be there. And so there was a lot of things going on at the time. 5 million more people were unemployed in September than when Trump took office. The Clinton era roots of financial crisis. They put a program, when Clinton signed a program, putting people first, as you see in the second paragraph there, using private pension funds to invest in government priorities such as affordable housing. Now, it didn't hit as badly here in the Pittsburgh area because we have very conservative lending institutions. My wife and I had a home down in Virginia that we purchased in 2007, and in the next 10 years it lost almost a third of its value. All right, we had to wait till just June, whenever the prices of homes were skyrocketing everywhere, to in fact sell that property to get out of it. Now the prices are dropping again. The problem down in the Virginia area was the fact that many banks loosened up their reins and in fact gave loans to people who did not meet their 25% or 30% capability of affording their homes. So whenever they lost their jobs, they couldn't afford their homes went on the market. I have a friend who has a real estate company out in Houston, Texas, who in fact covers 23 zip codes in that area. At one time, she had almost 2,400 homes that were being foreclosed. And so, like I said, the market around here was nearly not that bad, seeing that that was a big chunk of Texas, but it wasn't the whole thing for sure. Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Okay, let's look at not what was being told to the public, but what is being told to us now by these different organizations. The use of the University of Penn's Wharton budget model said basically that that program creates economic analysis of public policy, fiscal policy, which in fact there is low confidence that the legislation will have any impact on inflation. According to the Congressional Budget Office, that's a federal agency that provides budget and economic information to Congress, the bill will barely make a dent on inflation, and in the near term could even nudge it upward. Elizabeth Warren finally admitted that the Inflation Act doesn't lower cost. Okay, on the program with Andrea Mitchell on MSNBC, she asked about the Inflation Reduction Act. Her answer is that it might bring down the deficit, it won't reduce inflation. So basically everybody knew that the story that they were telling us, the name of this Inflation Reduction Act, was something that it wasn't capable of doing, which is really sad when you look at it. Let's look at some of the other issues that have caused our taxpayers trillions of dollars. When Obama, his alternate energy bankruptcies, there were over 38 companies that in fact went into the solar energy during the Obama reign. Okay, and this program came out in 2012, and I want to point that out, that the total loss back at that time, and that's without interest growing on this loss and everything, by these 6 companies was $1,340,000,000 just from these 6 companies that went under. And the Solyndra is a company that is interesting because it was a controversial, it was really a scandal for the Obama administration, because 8 key figures of the administration and of the vice presidency at that time was Biden, got caught up in this. And I bring up Ron Klein, who was the vice president's chief of staff, because of the fact that whenever prices were going up, as we'll point out in a little bit, he was complaining that Trump was screwing up the economy whenever the gas went up to $3. Wonder what he has to say now. Under Obama, the presidential task force on the auto industry, we were giving billions to the auto industry to keep them up, keep them working. And as you see by the second paragraph there, at that time it was estimated that General Motors might require $30 billion more to emerge from bankruptcy. By mid-July 2009, both companies had restructured and emerged from bankruptcy. The task force was scaled back from day-to-day involvement in periodic monitoring. Okay, during just that one program, the government lost $11.2 billion in its rescue of General Motors. Now the next slide brings up a lot in question. A year and a half later, the chief of General Motors, Daniel Atkinson, made a comment that calling China the crown jewel in the GM universe. 20 new redesigned and new products are going to be coming out of China in the next 2 years. China is essential to our global strategy, he said at a news conference. We want to understand the preferences the China market wants. We bring our best designs and best technologies to China. In fact, General Motors now employs more workers in China than it does members of the United Auto Workers in the U.S. According to its website, the company now has about 58,000 workers in China. That's about 20% more than domestic UAW workforce, which was dwindled in recent years. So billions of dollars were spent to save General Motors so they could provide employment in China, not for our unions here. And this is a main problem that I have with all of these programs. You know, it's even with the people running for office now to find out that their children aren't in public schools dealing with the union workers that they deal with. They're in private schools. Okay, that's a whole other program which we'll get into next time. Biden is considering a $450,000 payment to illegal families separated at the border. Now, this was a big thing back during the Trump administration. Nobody mentioned it during Obama, but during Trump, it was a big thing because they had kids separated from somebody. Okay, the Biden administration could end up paying illegal immigrant families over $1 billion in settlements, according to the, I forget who, Oh my God, that's getting old to pain. Trump's immigration policies included separated migrant workers from adults after they illegally crossed into the U.S. regardless of relationship. Now let's look at the reason why they were separated. Okay? Trouble with the border is fueling human trafficking. One expert estimates that 60% of the Latin American children sent across the border alone or with smugglers have been taken by cartels. That's a terrible situation. And as you see the number above there, 18,847 children have arrived illegally in 2021. The situation that they're in today is not even talked about by the media. But it's exactly the same as that had been under Trump, which is interesting to see that the media ignores that. Now, I said I'd bring back Biden's White House Chief of Staff. His old tweet blasting President Trump when gas went over $3 a gallon hasn't aged well. Klein went after Trump in 2018. Gas prices rose above the $3 mark and even wrote that Democrats would be happier if the media focused on the fuel prices instead of then President calling for a probe into surveillance of his 2016 campaign. And he wrote, gas prices or the healthcare premiums up, gas prices rising, manufacturers fleeing. He wrote in June 2018, so much for winning, thanks Trump. What would he write today? The current mortgage rate, as you may well know, it has gone from a little bit above 3%, and it's now hovering towards 6%. And it has more than doubled in the last 8 months alone. Prices have gone up. Now that prices are starting to go down, and we'll talk about that in a second, prices have gone up significantly. But this isn't the worst the country's ever been in by any stretch. Under Jimmy Carter, interest rates rose to 18.63%. Okay, so imagine buying one of these $500,000 homes today with 20% down and mortgaging $400,000 at almost 20% interest. That would crush everybody. Okay, so there's a long way to go before we get to that figure, but no one knows where it's going to go. New home sales fell much more than expected according to Trading Economics. The markets shrunk 8.1% from a month earlier to a seasonally adjusted rate of 590,000 units in June of 2022, well below the market expectations of 660,000. It is the lowest reading since April 2020 as the housing market is cooling as rising mortgages and material costs hurt affordability. Sales in the West fell by 36.7%. In the Northeast, not bad by 5.3%. In the Midwest, 43%. Okay, so there are some really things going on in the market that if you're not into it by buying a house or refinancing a house, you may not be familiar with. Biden tries to downplay inflation issues by telling those hurting to just put this in perspective. And this was just written in September 19th, 2022. On the 60 Minutes program hosted by Scott Peely, Mr. President, as you know, last Tuesday the annual inflation rate came in at 8.3. The stock market nosedived. People are shocked by their gradual grocery bills. What can you do better and faster? According to the president, well, first of all, let's put this in perspective, Biden stated. Inflation rate month to month was just an inch, hardly at all. You're not arguing that 8.3 is a good news, Paley said. No, I'm not saying it's good news, but it was 8.2 or 8.2 before, stated Biden. I mean, it's not make it sound like it's all of a sudden. My God, it went to 8.2. It's been the highest inflation rate, Mr. President, in 40 years, answered Paley. I got that, Biden quickly shot back. But guess what we're in a position where for last several months, it hasn't spiked. It has it's been basically even. For an inflation rate that used to be 2%, for a president to sit there and say that 8% is even is questionable. Does the Inflation Reduction Act violate Biden's $400,000 tax pledge? And this is by CNBC, so it's not by some right-wing organization. As a result of the policy, those with incomes below $200,000 would pay almost $17 billion in combined additional tax in 2023, according to a Joint Committee on Taxation analysis published July 29. That combined tax burden falls to about $2 billion by 2031, according to the JCT, an independent scorekeeper for Congress. The Democrats' approach to tax reform means increasing taxes on low-income and middle-income Americans, said Mike Crapo, Republican in Idaho, ranking member of the Financial Committee, said the analyst. Democrats' proposed increase, and this came from their study from the United States Senate Committee on Finance. In 2023, taxes will increase by $16.7 billion on American taxpayers earning less than $200,000. A nearly $17 billion targeted solidly at low and middle income earners next year, right in the middle of the stagflation. By 2031, when the new green energy credits and subsidies provide an even greater benefit to those at higher incomes, those earning below $400,000 are projected to bear as much as 2/3 of the burden of the additional tax revenue collected that year. The more this bill is analyzed by impartial experts, the more we can see the Democrats are trying to sell the American people a bill of goods, Crapo continued. Nonpartisan analysts are confirming this bill raises taxes on the middle class and produces no meaningful deficit reduction when gimmicks are removed and the full cost is accounted for. No wonder this bill, which was drafted behind closed doors, is being rushed through the Senate at a record pace. I'll stop for a second here and give you the opportunity to take down this website. This is the website that, in fact, I withdrew that paperwork from if you wanted. It's the www.finance.senate.gov. And you can look at the program again to see it if you would need to take that down. Let's look at rents are rising at a faster pace than in 40 years. Inflation, wrath, recession fears are heading into the middle and upper class American. Gas prices, record high in Los Angeles, soars past June heights. And this was just taken off the paper 3 days ago, okay, which demonstrates that, in fact, we have gas prices going back up again. As I mentioned earlier in the program, while we're looking at everything that's going up, let's look at this. American top 13 cities for crime and what the parties that run them. This actually in Law News was actually 20 cities for crime, but I just pulled down the top 13 because that's all I could fit on the page. The crime is rising in this country. Judges are letting criminals go faster. They're letting criminals go, period. And in fact, something that we have to pay attention to as things are rising in the country. And lastly, from Biden's U.S. Department of Education. Massive reversal on student loan forgiveness. And here's just what happened according to the NPR. On Thursday, the department quietly changed the language. The governance now says, as of September 29, 2022, borrowers with federal student loans not held by the Education Department cannot obtain the one-time debt relief by consolidating those loans into direct loans. Okay, now I'm sure people in our communities are important, because I'm sure that there are tons of kids in college that this is affecting them. Last night, as the word spread of the change deadline date, a deadline that had already passed, social media platforms exploded with posts from angry borrowers saying that the Biden administration has changed the rules without any warning and had pushed millions of Americans out of eligibility for loan forgiveness. I'm sorry, folks, but that's where our program ends. Thank you very much for coming, and I'm sorry that I had to share all this bad information with you, but it is true.